The global superpower is currently locked in a war it cannot easily win, facing an enemy that refuses to collapse. In the spring of 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive, coordinated aerial campaign against Iran, targeting its leadership, military apparatus, and critical infrastructure. The goal of the Trump administration was swift: destroy Iran's missile networks, eliminate its nuclear ambitions, and force a total diplomatic capitulation. Yet, months into the conflict, the reality on the ground has diverged entirely from the initial script. Instead of a decisive victory, Washington finds itself caught in a high-stakes war of attrition. The strategic calculations of American planners did not account for a critical variable: the calculated intervention of the world's other major nuclear power. As the conflict intensified, Russia moved to position itself as the ultimate wildcard in the Middle East. By maintaining its presence at Iran's Bushehr nuclear facility and coordinating directly with Tehran on enriched uranium, Moscow has effectively drawn a line in the sand. This intervention completely destabilizes the American position. While U.S. forces endure relentless drone and missile counterattacks, requiring the emergency evacuation of casualties to NATO bases in Germany, the strategic buffer Washington once relied upon is eroding. This is no longer a localized conflict to contain a regional rogue state. It has evolved into a proxy confrontation between nuclear-armed titans. How did a campaign designed to project absolute American dominance end up exposing the structural limits of U.S. military and diplomatic power? To understand this shift, one must look at the global framework governing energy supply and strategic alliances. For decades, global stability rested on a fragile geographical bottleneck: the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's petroleum passes through this narrow waterway daily. The implicit contract of the modern global economy was simple: the United States military would guarantee freedom of navigation, and in exchange, global markets would enjoy stable energy prices. Iran, fully aware of its conventional military disadvantage against the West, spent decades developing an asymmetric counterweight. Rather than building a massive blue water navy, Tehran invested heavily in thousands of mobile ballistic missile pads, low-cost loitering munitions, and deep underground bunkers. The entire system was designed to act as a dead man's switch. If attacked, Iran could instantly choke the Strait of Hormuz, triggering an immediate shockwave through global financial markets. When the United States launched Operation Epic Fury in early 2026, it attempted to decapitate this system entirely. However, the American economic and military apparatus is built for short, high-intensity interventions, not prolonged dual blockades. By imposing a naval blockade on Iranian ports, the U.S. triggered an equal and opposite reaction: an absolute Iranian blockade of the Persian Gulf. This disrupted global trade, pushed oil prices past $108 a barrel, and exposed U.S. forward operating bases to relentless, multi-directional drone saturation attacks. The roots of this specific flashpoint trace back to a fundamental shift in the global balance of power over the last decade. Following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Western nations imposed unprecedented economic sanctions on the Russian Federation, aiming to isolate its economy and cripple its industrial base. This strategy, however, produced an unintended consequence. It forced a marriage of convenience between Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran. Faced with severe isolation, Russia found an invaluable partner in Iran, which had spent 40 years learning how to circumvent Western sanctions regimes. Tehran supplied Moscow with thousands of Shahed drones for its campaign in Eastern Europe. In return, Russia provided Iran with advanced cyber warfare capabilities, satellite intelligence, and crucial technical support for its civilian nuclear infrastructure, specifically at the Bushehr power station. When the Trump administration returned to the White House with a mandate to project maximum pressure globally, Washington assumed its traditional allies would fall into line. But the geopolitical landscape of 2026 is structurally different from that of 2017. European allies, already exhausted by years of regional instability and high inflation, refused to provide the naval coalition support the U.S. requested to police the Gulf. Sensing this internal friction within the Western alliance, the Kremlin saw an opening to project power far beyond its own borders. The mechanism of Russia's intervention operates not through direct military confrontation, but through calculated asymmetric leverage. As U.S. and Israeli bombs fell on Iranian military compounds, the Russian state nuclear agency, Rosatom, deliberately maintained its presence at the Bushehr nuclear plant. By keeping Russian personnel on the ground at a live reactor, Moscow created a physical shield. Any direct American strike on Bushehr risked killing Russian citizens and triggering an environmental disaster, effectively deterring a complete destruction of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Simultaneously, Vladimir Putin engaged in direct diplomatic maneuvers, holding high-level communications with President Trump regarding Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium. Russia positioned itself as the only alternative diplomatic broker capable of managing the crisis. While Washington attempted to dictate terms through sheer firepower, Moscow utilized its leverage over Iran's nuclear material to force its way to the negotiating table. This diplomatic maneuvering directly impacts the tactical reality for American soldiers. Iran's regional proxies launched coordinated drone strikes on U.S. installations, exposing serious gaps in localized air defense networks. Because regional allies hesitated to allow the direct use of their medical facilities for a war they didn't support, the Pentagon was forced to fly wounded American personnel thousands of miles away to NATO facilities in Germany. The invisible supply lines and logistical assumptions of the American military were suddenly laid bare for the world to see. The consequences of this prolonged stalemate are distributing wealth and power in entirely unexpected directions. The immediate losers are the ordinary citizens of the global economy. As the dual blockade continues, shipping insurance rates have spiked, aviation routes have been forced into costly detours, and global supply chains face systemic delays. For Washington, the financial toll is staggering. The military cost of the conflict quickly surpassed $18 billion, forcing the Pentagon to request hundreds of billions more from Congress. Conversely, the short-term winners are the non-aligned energy exporters and the domestic political factions feeding on the chaos. Russia benefits directly from the spike in crude oil prices, which funnels vital capital back into the Kremlin's treasury despite ongoing Western sanctions. China, while publicly calling for peace and open waterways, has successfully leveraged the crisis to deepen its strategic alignment with Moscow and Tehran, presenting a unified front against unilateral Western actions. For the Trump administration, the domestic political cost is mounting. The president found himself forced to repeatedly claim total military victory to domestic audiences, even while intelligence reports confirmed that Iran had successfully restored operational access to nearly all of its missile launch sites along the Strait of Hormuz. The administration's platform of global retrenchment and cutting support to NATO allies has clashed directly with the realities of an expanding, resource-intensive Middle Eastern war.